I was 18 at the time, and definitely far from being a mature, reasonable kid. I constantly got in fights with my parents over nothing, and would make it way more dramatic than it had to be. This day was especially rough, though, and my parents ended up basically kicking me out for the day. But being the immature, stubborn kid I was, I decided to prove a point by not coming back. I didn't know if just for the night, or a few days, or really what I was even doing. I clearly didn't think it through. I was just upset. But after walking around town for a while, kicking rocks and eventually calming down, I realized the sun was gone, and I needed somewhere to spend the night. I had buddies that I was sure would let me crash at their place, but I knew their parents would call my parents and make it an even bigger thing, so I wanted to avoid that. Again, I was an idiot. First place I thought of where I could be alone was this old house that had been vacant for as long as I could remember. I'd actually explored it a few times years ago with my friends, and during the day it wasn't all that creepy. Just an old, empty home. Figured checking it out and maybe staying there for the night would work, even if I didn't sleep and stayed up all night. I started walking over there. It was on a normal neighborhood street, but the road was cut off years ago and marked as a dead end. Past that dead end was the abandoned, grown over driveway that led to the house. I got there around 10 p.m. Of course, this was illegal, so I checked my surroundings the whole way there and made sure I was alone before sneaking past the gate and onto the property. It was surrounded by trees, so past that point I was good. The house was buried in the bushes. I almost couldn't even see it until I was right up next to it, because every inch of the place was grown over, like the forest was swallowing it from the ground up. But from what I could see, it looked exactly as I'd remembered from a few years ago. The broken door that I got in through last time was still hanging open, and the inside almost looked untouched. I'll admit though, at night it was creepy as hell. It was very dark. Every other door and window was completely boarded up. I knew pretty much the moment I stepped inside that there was no way I'd be sleeping there. But I was intrigued enough to stay and look around some more. What I was looking for, I couldn't tell ya. Anything interesting, I guess. I was only in there for a few minutes, getting to the staircase and starting to head upstairs, when I heard a couple creaks on the floor I was just on. I froze. They were footsteps for sure, and after a quiet pause, I heard a door open somewhere near the side of the house by the door I'd entered from. I felt a shiver go through my whole body, knowing whoever was down there was right by my only way out of this place. I stood frozen halfway up the steps, waiting to see what happened. I still had hope that maybe this person didn't know I was there, and would go back into whatever room they were in so I could make a quick exit. But even more eerie and unnerving than them walking around was not hearing them move at all. It was like they were waiting for me. After I think 10 full minutes, my mind started thinking that there was no possible way they hadn't moved. Maybe they went back into the room very quietly, or even that there wasn't anyone here and I just didn't hear it right, and the door opened on its own. Regardless, I had to leave at some point, even if it meant running past someone and sprinting straight out the door. I quietly stepped to the bottom of the stairs and peered around the corner, not seeing anyone. Then I walked to the next corner, looking down toward the open doorway. A man stood directly in front of it, already staring at me. Before I could even react, he called out, telling me to stop where I was. It was dark, but I could see he didn't have normal clothes on. He had a uniform, which I instantly pieced together that he was a cop. You shouldn't be here, kid. Why are you out here? His voice was deep, but also kind of slurred. I nervously just said sorry, that I would leave right away. He stood still, like he was thinking about my answer, before taking a step toward me. Did you come here alone? The way he said it sent chills through me, and now a little closer, his uniform looked off. Shadows covered his whole body, including his face, but I could still tell that it didn't look right. It was distressed and loose. The man was tall, but skinny, and it looked like the uniform didn't fit him correctly. Like it was too big, or like it wasn't his. I still couldn't see his face or eyes though, which made this whole interaction even creepier and harder to figure out. I didn't know what to say. I asked you a question. Speak up. His voice grew deeper and more demanding. I was so scared I said yeah, that it was just me. He took another couple steps closer. And what was it you were looking for out here? I shook my head like I didn't know. After a second, I could see his face move in the darkness, which I think was him smiling. And then he turned and walked toward the room I heard him come out of. It was entirely pitch black in there. He walked right up to it and leaned on the door frame. Come here, he said in a half-friendly, half-horrifying tone. I stayed frozen. He stood up a little taller and pushed the door open even further, telling me again to come here. Everything in me knew at this point that he wasn't a cop, not a real one. And now that he was by the room, he wasn't blocking the open door to the outside. He was still just a couple feet away from it, but I took my chances. I sprinted straight for the door. I saw his arm reach out as I passed him, and felt his hand grab onto the collar of my shirt, choking me for a split second before he lost grip and I slipped away. I sprinted nonstop all the way out of the woods and across town until I made it home. And when I got there, I found a cop car in the driveway. My parents had called the police to report me missing after I hadn't shown up home after dark, and not hearing anything from any of my friends' parents. I honestly was still so horrified and in shock from what just happened that I didn't say anything. I also was scared to admit to the cops that I broke into the abandoned house and possibly ran from another officer, even though I was 99% sure it was a fake cop. The fact that those two cops never questioned me about the vacant house should have been enough to tell me it definitely was not a real officer I ran into. Because if it was, every officer in the area would have been radioed in with a description of me. Now I take full responsibility for the danger I put myself in that night, purely out of being a dumb teenager. But still, I don't think I deserved whatever the was waiting for me in that room. Had I assumed he was a cop and listened to the man in that house.
This week, show your love while staying on budget at Grocery Outlet, your extreme value.
For my first 20-ish years growing up, I lived in a very small town on the countryside. It was quiet and nothing ever really happened there. Honestly, a really boring place to live, especially as a kid, because there wasn't much to do. When I was 17 or 18, during summer break, me and my best friend Marcus had a horrible idea. Sort of on a whim, we decided to check out an abandoned place on the outskirts of town. This place everyone in town knew about. I think it was the only truly abandoned structure in the area. But other than the exaggerated, probably made up stories, all me and Marcus really knew about it was that it was an old farmhouse from the very early 1900s that sat on a huge plot of land. I think almost 200 acres. The owners had passed away decades ago, way before I was born, and the county bought the land but had never done anything with it. They just put up a fence and signs all around it, saying state property, no trespassing. So anytime you went on any of the roads out there, you could see this old, dilapidated farmhouse right in the middle of a field, rotting away in the distance. Bored out of our minds, Marcus and I just wanted to explore the place. Although it was a dumb idea, we weren't looking for trouble or trying to mess with the place. We both got flashlights and took Marcus's car to the edge of town, parking off the road and walking about a mile to where the farm was. We knew cops patrolled the area sometimes, so instead of walking up to it through the wide open grassy field, we followed the fence all the way around to the back, where it was backed up to a wooded area. That way, we'd only be walking out in the open for a couple of minutes. It was actually crazy at first to see the place so close up, after having only seen it from far away for all my life. All the wood was weathered down to almost this black color, with no paint left on it, and had vines and weeds growing up the walls. But surprisingly, it looked relatively stable. It didn't look like the roof or any parts of the walls were caving in. We hurried up to the side of the farmhouse and found an open window to get in through. We didn't even try testing the front door, assuming it was locked, and still trying to lay low. I was the first one in, and helped Marcus through. Then we both stood still for a second by the window, moving our flashlights around and listening. You could see all the dust in the air moving around in the beams of our flashlights, and it was silent inside. After a couple seconds, we started walking around. The floors felt sturdy, but still bowed and creaked with pretty much every step. Me and Marcus kept looking at each other as we walked around. I think we both had a deep, unsettling feeling about the place, now that we were inside of it. But neither of us said anything for the first couple of minutes, until Marcus suddenly whispered my name. "Sam, come look at this." "What is that?" He pointed up at the ceiling. Between the floorboards above us, there was this very dim orange light, just barely glowing through the cracks in the wood. It didn't even really give off any light, and you could only see it standing directly under it. Both of us were weirded out, but also curious. How the hell could there be a light in here after all these years? We should have known to just leave right there. But we slowly walked upstairs. Upstairs, there was only a hallway with a bunch of doors that I assume led to bedrooms. They were all closed. However, under one of them, we could see a brighter orange glow flickering in the crack under the door. Obviously, this was just another sign to leave, and we were stupid not to. However, what kept us there was that it was dead silent. Really dead silent. The entire time that we'd been inside, there was not a single sound that didn't come from either of us. And in a place like this, we should have been able to hear if we weren't alone. I even walked up to the door and put my ear up to it, and didn't hear anything. So I turned the handle and pushed the door open slowly. The heavy creaking sound it made filled the entire house, and my eyes instantly widened. It felt like I couldn't breathe. I was so horrified. There was a group on their knees, huddled in a circle, I think 3 men, and a few candles lit up around the room. Even then, I could hardly see much, just the shape of them all huddled in the middle of the room, and they were motionless. even after the door squeaking open and Marcus and I having been walking around for the last 5 minutes. They didn't move or even look toward us. It was like they were stuck or asleep or something. I only looked at them for maybe 3 seconds before Marcus pulled me away and we both hurried down the stairs. We were running, but still also trying to be quiet for some reason. I remember feeling like every sound we made was amplified because of the adrenaline I was in. We got up to the window and Marcus quickly climbed out, and just as I started to, I heard multiple heavy thumps of footsteps running out of the room and down the stairs. I basically dove out of the window, then we made a dead sprint for the woods. We got a little ways in, just enough to start slowing down and catching our breaths, when we both heard a loud thud from back at the farmhouse. Both of us thought it was probably the open window getting slammed shut behind us, but we can't say for sure. The walk back was awful. We both had headaches from the intensity of what just happened, and couldn't even begin to piece together what it was we actually saw. Marcus dropped me off at home, and strangely, after a few days, we never really talked about it. Think we wanted to forget it even happened, to be honest. When I finished high school, I moved away for college, and several years later, when I passed by the old farm, the house was gone. I hope I did well enough at describing everything, as it was genuinely the most horrifying experience I've had, and will probably ever have.
Whoa.
What's that?
I just built a budgeting app in Base 44.
Guys.
This happened while I was traveling through the West Coast, with the sole purpose of going on a ton of backpacking trips. I'd taken a whole month and lined up a bunch of trails to go on. All of them were regular hiking and camping trails, except for one. A buddy of mine who was also adventurous and really into camping had told me about an abandoned mining town that sounded really interesting. Now, there's tons of these old mining towns all over the West, from the sporadic gold rushes, so I'd been to dozens by this point in my life. But this one was different. It wasn't in the desert or on the side of a sandy, rocky hill. This town was in the mountains, buried in a forest, which is actually really rare to find, and makes these ones almost never visited by regular people or tourists. So if you're looking for undisturbed, raw, abandoned structures, these are the jackpot. It sounded really cool and interesting, and it was only a few miles off one of the trails I was backpacking along, so it was worth the hike up to check out. And when I was done, I could just hike back down to my campsite on the trail. I got there around midday. It was cloudy, which definitely gave the abandoned town a more unsettling appearance, but it was one of the coolest things that I'd seen in a while. Because of all the time the forest had to regrow around the mining town, all of the small cabin homes were almost part of the forest now. It had clearly been there abandoned, left behind and untouched for over a century. You could even tell that no one had really been there to visit it or explore it. There were no footpaths or trails going between the homes, and everything was quiet and still. I walked past the first few houses and over to one that was mostly intact. It even had some old furniture in it, a wooden rocking chair and some wooden shelves. I walked around out there for another half hour, and as I did, I had this really creepy feeling looming over me. The kind to get me to swivel around and keep checking behind me, like someone could be lurking around and watching me. But it was easy to tell myself that it was just the creepy nature of being alone in a forgotten mining town. It was far more unsettling when it was deep in the forest, rather than on an open desert hill like almost every other one was. When I eventually got to the end of the town, there was an opening in the trees, and right in the side of the mountain was an opening to the mine. It was kind of insane how instantly dark it got in there. From standing outside, I could see maybe 5 feet down the tunnel before it was blackout dark. Before entering, I stood at the opening for a minute. There was this sound coming from inside the mine. This low, constant, almost deep rumbling sound, like something echoing through the entire tunnel system. It was incredibly unsettling, like I could feel it resonating inside me the closer I got to the entrance. It gave me a feeling of dread that actually really freaked me out. My eyes also felt strange the longer I looked into the absolute darkness. It was like they were trying to focus on something, but it was so dark, I think they started making up shapes in the blackness. I only took a couple steps in before my whole body stiffened up and wouldn't let me go any further, so I quickly turned back and left the tunnel. I hurried back through the abandoned town, constantly looking over my shoulder at the entrance to the mine, with that feeling that I was being watched growing stronger. I didn't bother looking around anymore, making my way back to the trail where I had set my camp up at. There was only a couple hours of daylight, so I made food and prepped everything for tomorrow's hike, then got some sticks for a campfire and lit it up. I didn't really try to rationalize the sound or the feeling that I had over there, and more so tried to just bury it and forget about it, knowing it would be dangerous to let the paranoia set in right before the sun went down. I sat by the fire, poking the flames with a stick, and listened to the calm forest around me. I'd guess about 2 hours went by, and the forest became far from calming. I started hearing animal sounds, which on a normal day I wouldn't think twice about, but that night something seemed off about it. Specifically, there was this one elk somewhere close by that would bellow every few minutes, echoing through the whole forest. It didn't sound like it was moving. It was always from the same spot behind me, somewhere in the general direction of the mining town. It gave me a chill every time it sounded off. But then, after a while, it just stopped for maybe 15 to 20 minutes. The silence got me back to being in my head, thinking and reflecting, but all it took was a sudden sharp snapping sound to get me out of it. I shot my eyes toward the noise. Somehow, my instant first thought was that someone followed me back to my camp. I don't know why, because I never saw anyone or had any reason to believe that, but it was like I knew it in my gut. Something was wrong. I stood up and tried to look as intently as I could into the dark, but after a few seconds I said fuck it and started to pack my things. For the whole 5-ish minutes that I was packing, nothing happened. No more noises and no sightings. I trusted my gut though, and out there in the backcountry alone, you really can't afford to ignore those feelings. I strapped everything up, put on my headlamp, and kicked dirt over the fire to smother it. The moment the flames went out, I heard a set of footsteps sprinting toward me from right where I'd heard the snap sound. My headlamp didn't reach nearly far enough to see anything, so after a second, I just turned around and started running down the trail. I ran for a while, but I never heard whoever it was follow me onto the trail. Seemed like they stayed back after I ran off. I honestly couldn't believe my gut had been right the entire time. Someone was out there following me and watching me that whole time. The trail down wasn't too bad, but on no sleep, it was harder than it should have been. I got back to my car by early morning and got out of that forest. I told my friend, the one who had mentioned the place, about what happened. He sort of thought I was crazy, although he said he never actually went up to the tunnel that led to the mines, nor did he camp near it afterward. But he also said that the elk I heard might have been calling out because it saw someone in the forest, and was using it as a territorial call, which, come to think of it, probably should have been my sign something was wrong and to leave. Whatever the case, that mining town is probably best left alone and forgotten.
When that personalization happens, you are getting better care.
And it looks like if they're taking care of somebody from their family.
We've always agreed, because the more we
In September 2020, a young woman named Scarlett Salas disappeared while hiking alone in Germany's Black Forest, and despite years of searching, nobody knows what happened to her. Scarlett was 26 years old at the time, and she had been hiking the Canyon Trail, a challenging route in the Black Forest region of southern Germany, known for its steep gorges and ravines. What makes her disappearance particularly puzzling is that her gear was brightly colored and distinctive, yet searchers found nothing definitive. What investigators were able to do, though, was piece together her movements up until that last day, through a combination of eyewitness accounts from other hikers and people she encountered along the way, plus her digital trail, things like social media posts, phone records, and possibly GPS data. They could track where she'd been and when. The last confirmed sighting of Scarlett came from surveillance camera footage at a local supermarket. She was also heard from one final time when she called her boyfriend. Investigators have essentially narrowed down the possibilities to two main scenarios. Either Scarlett had some kind of accident in the wilderness, or she was the victim of foul play. Without any physical evidence, it's impossible to say which is more likely, and both theories have their troubling implications. To understand the case better, it helps to know a bit about who Scarlett was before she disappeared. She was born on September 22nd, 1993, in Paderborn, a mid-sized city in the North Rhine-Westphalia region of Western Germany. She grew up there with her family, which included an older sister named Janina, who was 2 years her senior. After finishing school, Scarlett pursued practical vocational training rather than university, which is common in Germany's education system. She completed an apprenticeship in Social Security services. This kind of apprenticeship would have trained her to work in Germany's social welfare system. And by the time of her disappearance, Scarlett was living by herself in Bad Lippspring, a small town also located in North Rhine-Westphalia, not far from where she grew up. Now, those who knew her described her as remarkably independent and self-reliant. She'd moved out of her parents' home at 18 and quickly developed a passion for solo travel. Over the years, she'd visited nearly every region of the world on her own. In November 2019, she decided to take a gap year, an extended break from work dedicated to travel. Her destination was Southeast Asia, a popular route for backpackers with its mix of cultures, landscapes, and adventure. While hiking through Myanmar, she met someone who would become important to her. So for the next 4 months, from late 2019 into early 2020, Scarlett and Joey traveled together across Southeast Asia. Then March 2020 hit, and the COVID-19 pandemic changed everything. Scarlett and Joey had to abandon their journey and return home. She to Germany, he to China. Despite the distance, Scarlett and Joey decided to make their relationship work. They stayed together as a long-distance couple, communicating across continents and time zones. Scarlett was serious about their future and already told people she wanted to eventually marry him and move to China to be with him. Back in Germany during the spring of 2020, Scarlett found herself with nothing but time. Her gap year plans were ruined, and with lockdowns in effect, there wasn't much work available. Her mother was also out of work because of the pandemic restrictions, so the two decided to do something productive with their unexpected free time. So they chose to hike the Camino de Santiago, one of the world's most famous pilgrimage routes. The Camino isn't just one trail, it's actually a network of different routes that all converge on Santiago de Compostela, a city in northwestern Spain that's been a Christian pilgrimage destination for over 1,000 years. In June 2020, Scarlett and her mother set out together. Over the next 6 weeks, they covered an impressive 800 kilometers. That's nearly 500 miles. During their Camino hike, Scarlett and her mother met a young man who was also walking the trail. As hikers often do, they got to talking about their adventures and future plans. The young man mentioned he was interested in hiking the Schluchtensteig, the Canyon Trail, back in Germany. It's a challenging and scenic route through the Black Forest, and Scarlett was intrigued. They hit it off well enough to exchange phone numbers, figuring they might hike together sometime. After Scarlett returned to Germany, she and this man followed up on the idea. They made concrete plans to tackle the Schluchtensteig together in September 2020. Just before they were supposed to leave, the man got sick and had to cancel at the last minute, which left Scarlett in a difficult position. She'd been looking forward to this hike and had already made her preparations. When he suggested postponing to find a new date that worked for both of them, Scarlett wasn't interested in waiting. She was ready to go now. So she made a decision that would prove fateful. She'd do the hike alone. But for someone with Scarlett's experience, this wasn't a reckless choice. She'd hiked solo all over the world and had just completed 800 kilometers on the Camino. She was fit, experienced, and self-reliant. A multi-day hike through the Black Forest, even alone, wouldn't have seemed particularly dangerous to her. But this time, something would go terribly wrong. The Canyon Trail is a 119-kilometer long-distance hiking route that winds through the southern part of Germany's Black Forest. The trail is typically divided into 6 stages or legs, which most hikers complete over the course of a week, though some do it faster or slower, depending on their pace and experience. True to its name, the trail takes hikers through several dramatic gorges and canyons, deep, narrow valleys, carved by rivers over millennia. The scenery is stunning, with waterfalls, rocky cliffs, and dense forest, but the terrain can be genuinely challenging. Parts of the route are considered mountainous, with steep ascents and descents. The trail's elevation varies considerably, running between roughly 500 and 1,000 meters above sea level. While these aren't alpine heights, the constant ups and downs make for strenuous hiking. And it attracts around 80,000 hikers annually, which means you're rarely completely alone on the trail during the busy season. Scarlett planned to complete the 119-kilometer trail in 6 days, which was a reasonable pace. She'd tackle 1 stage per day and camping along the way. On her journey home afterward, she had arranged to stop and visit a friend named Vanessa who lived in Mainz. Mainz is a city on the Rhine River, and its location made it a convenient stopping point. It sits roughly halfway between the Black Forest and Scarlett's home in Bad Lippspring. For the hike itself, Scarlett came well prepared with proper gear. They weren't camouflaged or earth-toned. They were designed to be seen. In a forest environment, these colors should stand out dramatically. Search teams looking for Scarlet would have been scanning specifically for these items. Now, on September 4th, she started the 600-kilometer drive from her hometown to Stühlingen, the city at the beginning of the Schluchtensteig. I think for some reason she needed some company, so she shared her trip on a ride-sharing app, and there she found 2 other people. I do not know if these 2 people were men or women. On the evening, she stayed at a camping ground in Stühlingen. Then on the 5th of September, Scarlet hiked the first leg of the trail from Stühlingen to Blumberg and slept in her tent after that. And on September 6th, Scarlet hiked the second leg from Blumberg to Schattenmühle. On this leg, she met 3 young men who were also hiking the trail. So together, they decided to camp in a lost place of a former swimming pool a few kilometers into the third leg. The next morning, she and the 3 young men parted ways. They were hiking at different paces and probably had different plans, so each continued on their own. Scarlet hiked the third stage solo, making her way to Schluchsee, a town named after the large lake there. But instead of camping that night, she stayed at a pub. Now the reason for this can be that she just needed a real bed for the night, or, and this is the troubling thought, that she might have thought someone was following her and needed a much safer place than a camp. On September 8th, she completed the 4th stage, hiking to Saint-Blasien, a historic town known for its impressive domed cathedral. But instead of continuing directly on foot, she took a bus from Saint-Blasien forward to Todtmoos, which is actually where the 5th stage ends, and checked into a hotel there for the night. That evening, in Todtmoos, she went out to eat at a local restaurant. By pure coincidence, she ran into the same 3 men she'd hiked with and camped with back on the second day. So they decided to have dinner together, but sadly, these 3 men would turn out to be the last people known to have spent any significant time with Scarlet. Now that night, she stayed at a hiker's lodge, accommodations specifically for people walking long-distance trails. Then around 9 p.m., she messaged her friend Vanessa in Mainz, confirming their plans. She said she'd arrive the following evening and promised to reach out again once she knew a more exact time. After that, she called or messaged her mother and let her know the visit with Vanessa might extend a few days and that she'd probably be home by September 13th. Now these texts are very important because they show Scarlet's state of mind, and nothing seemed wrong. Then, it's September 10th, the day she disappeared. Now that morning, she responded to a message from Vanessa. Around 9:10 a.m., she left the lodge and headed out. Surveillance footage from a local supermarket shows her between 10:08 and 10:14 a.m., buying snacks and water for the trail. After the visit in the supermarket, she headed towards the start of the trail. In a park at the start of the trail, she had a phone call with her boyfriend. And later, he told the police that she seemed somehow unhappy, unconcentrated and stressed. But he also states that the connection was very bad. At 10:58 was the last recorded activity of her phone before it lost net connection, or was switched off. Now I think she might have had some problem between the supermarket and the trail. Because if there was any problem before this, she could easily have told someone at the supermarket, or before that. Now throughout the day, Vanessa tried reaching Scarlet multiple times, but noticed something concerning. Her messages weren't being delivered. And by around 7 p.m., with no word from Scarlet, Vanessa started to worry. So she called Scarlet's older sister Janina, asking if she knew when Scarlet was supposed to arrive. Janina didn't know, which raised alarm bells. She immediately contacted their parents. But at first they tried not to panic, as the Black Forest is known for patchy mobile phone coverage, especially in the valleys and gorges. But when morning came, and Scarlet's parents still couldn't reach her, their worry turned to genuine fear. They contacted the police and reported their daughter missing. The authorities took it seriously, and immediately launched search operations, knowing that in missing person cases, the first hours and days are critical. Scarlett's parents immediately drove to the Black Forest, and when they arrived, they found a massive search operation already underway. 2 specialized mountain rescue units were deployed, along with 60 trained search dogs and their handlers sniffing through the forest. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras flew overhead, scanning the canopy for any heat signatures that might indicate a person. They were also using an IMS eye catcher, a device that essentially mimics a cell tower. It pings all mobile phones within range, forcing them to connect and reveal their location. If Scarlett's phone had any battery left, this should find it. And meanwhile, local radio stations and newspapers put out public appeals, asking anyone who might have seen Scarlett or noticed anything unusual to come forward. At the same time, police were working other angles. They searched Scarlett's apartment looking for any clues. They interviewed her relatives and friends and tracked down witnesses who'd encountered her on the trail, piecing together her final movements. The police also investigated the 3 men from the trail, the man with whom she had originally planned the hike, and the 2 persons she offered a ride sharing on the first day, and did not find any of them suspect. A witness comes forward that an unknown woman had called a camping ground near Stulingen, where her car was parked, on the morning of the 10th. The caller said that she was traveling alone and asked if there is space on the ground for her small tent, which was not a problem. The caller was told that she could just come by and did not need a reservation. Despite all this technology and manpower, the IMSI catcher couldn't definitively determine if any detected phones belonged to Scarlett. September 13th to 14th. The intensive search continued at full scale, with teams covering the same ground repeatedly, hoping they'd missed something. But gradually, as days passed without finding anything, the operation was scaled back. After roughly 2 weeks of exhaustive searching, it was finally called off. They'd found absolutely nothing. The police managed to find people who'd seen Scarlett on each of the first 5 days of her hike. Her movements were well documented up through September 9th, but for September 10th, there was nothing. Not a single person reported seeing her on the 6th leg of the trail. This was extremely strange. The weather that day was good, and the trail would have been reasonably busy with other hikers. On a popular route in nice conditions, you'd expect someone to notice a woman with a bright red backpack. This absence of sightings led investigators to consider an unsettling possibility. Maybe Scarlett never actually started hiking that final leg at all. Therefore, the police also looked into the possibility of a voluntary disappearance, but found that unlikely as she had made concrete plans for the evening and following days. Also, she did not have her passport with her, and with the corona lockdowns, travel across borders would be almost impossible. After the trees had lost the leaves, another round of searches, again including helicopters, is performed. But again, nothing is found. Even after the official search ended, people refused to give up. A private volunteer group formed, likely including Scarlett's family, friends, and concerned locals, and they've continued searching ever since. Their approach is methodical and painstaking. They systematically comb through the entire area along the trail, literally examining it square meter by square meter, looking for any sign of Scarlett or her distinctive gear. After more than 5 years, they still haven't found anything. A year after Scarlett's disappearance, a woman contacted police with information. She said that on September 10th, 2020, she'd seen a woman matching Scarlett's description at a parking area along the trail. The location was significant, roughly 2/3 of the way through the final leg. The woman described her sitting on a rock at the edge of the parking lot. But one detail made investigators pay attention. She said the woman was sitting on a turquoise-colored towel. Scarlett had packed a turquoise towel for her hike. The parking lot had a bus stop, which could have been Scarlett's way back to civilization without finishing the hike. But in a cruel twist of fate, that bus line wasn't running on September 10th due to a road closure. After this witness came forward, the private search group brought in man-trailer dogs. They claimed the dogs tracked Scarlett's scent from Totmoose, where the final leg started, all the way to the parking lot, but not beyond it toward where the trail's endpoint. This suggested Scarlett walked to the parking lot, but didn't leave on foot. However, this raises serious questions. Can man-trailer dogs really follow a year-old scent? And why didn't the dogs used just 2 days after her disappearance find the same trail? Were man-trailer dogs even part of the original search? If not, that would be a strange oversight. Also in September 2021, an anonymous person filed a criminal complaint suggesting Scarlett was a victim of foul play. Until this point, police had largely favored the accident theory, that she'd somehow fallen or gotten injured in the wilderness. Now they had to seriously consider the possibility of a crime. One variation of the accident scenario is that Scarlett veered off the marked trail for some reason, and then had an accident in an area searchers never checked. Most search efforts concentrated on the area immediately surrounding the Schluchtensteig itself, which is already an enormous area to cover, given the rough, forested, mountainous terrain. The Black Forest is vast and dense, and if Scarlett wandered even a few hundred meters off the trail before something happened, she could be in a location that was simply never searched. Now the big question is, why would she leave the trail? But she was an experienced hiker who knew better. Perhaps she needed privacy for a bathroom break, or was looking for a place to refill her water bottle from a stream. Maybe she saw something interesting and went to investigate. Or perhaps she got disoriented somehow, though that seems unlikely given her experience. It's possible her remains are still out there somewhere, just beyond where anyone thought to look. Some have wondered if Scarlett chose to disappear. She was clearly frustrated about being separated from Joey and unable to pursue her plans to move to China because of the pandemic. The lockdowns had completely derailed her life plans, and long-distance relationships are difficult. But this theory has significant problems. She just confirmed her visit with Vanessa multiple times. Plus, there are practical problems with the voluntary disappearance idea. Scarlett didn't have her passport with her. It was back home. And in September 2020, international borders were still largely closed due to COVID-19 restrictions. Even if she'd wanted to disappear and start a new life somewhere, especially in China with Joey, she had no way to leave the country. So voluntary disappearance seems highly unlikely. This leaves the darkest possibility, that something criminal happened to Scarlett. When you combine the crime theory with the witness report, a seemingly complete explanation emerges. Scarlett was at the parking lot and left in a vehicle, either willingly or by force. And this would explain everything. Why her distinctive gear was never found despite years of searching. The darker possibility is that she was forced into a vehicle. A remote parking lot along a hiking trail would be an isolated spot where someone could approach a lone woman without witnesses. The entire parking lot scenario depends on one witness who came forward a full year later. How reliable is her memory after 12 months? Can she really be certain about the specific day, the exact person, and especially that detail about the turquoise towel? Memory is unreliable, especially for mundane observations. Seeing a hiker resting isn't particularly memorable. Did she actually see Scarlett on September 10th, 2020? Or is she mixing up different days and different people? And the man-trailer dogs allegedly tracking a year-old scent? I'm deeply skeptical. What's even more damning? Just 2 days after Scarlett disappeared, when her scent would have been extremely fresh, search dogs were deployed. If those dogs couldn't track her to the parking lot with a days-old trail, how did different dogs succeed with a year-old one? More than 5 years later, Scarlett Salas's disappearance remains completely unsolved. The Schluchtensteig continues to attract thousands of hikers yearly, But for those who know Scarlett's story, it's haunted by one question. What happened on September 10th? If you have any information about Scarlett Salas, please contact German authorities. Even the smallest detail could finally bring her family answers. On the evening of March 26, 1971, around 7:30 p.m., a special constable was out hunting during his time off. He was near an old, demolished kiln on a small island in the River Trent, just off Newton Road in Winchell, Burton-upon-Trent, Staffordshire, England. Something caught his eye sticking out of the ground. At first, he thought it was just an old bag of cement, but it seemed strange to find it there. He decided to head back to his workplace to put his gun away and grab a spade so he could check it out properly. When he came back and started digging, he got a shock. What he'd thought was a bag of cement was actually a human skull. After finding the skull, he went back to his workplace to get his business partner. His partner took a look and agreed it was definitely a skull. They immediately called the Burton police to report what they'd found. The police started an official dig the next day. It didn't take long. They uncovered the complete remains in just 90 minutes. Once they had the full skeleton, the authorities confirmed it was human. The person had been buried in a shallow grave, only 3 to 4 feet deep. But what made it even more disturbing was how they'd been positioned. There wasn't much flesh left on the body, so experts estimated the person had been dead for somewhere between 5 and 18 months before being found. The pathologist couldn't figure out exactly what killed them during the autopsy. There was no trauma to the skull or anything obvious like that. Still, investigators were pretty sure this was a murder. Now, back in the early 1970s, there were only 2 ways to get to the area where the body was found. One was over a bridge that had gates with padlocks on both ends. And the other route was much more complicated. You'd have to go over Burton Bridge, then walk along a rough footpath, cut through a field, climb over a fence, and finally go up a hill to reach the abandoned kilns where the body was found. Now, police think the killer probably used this second, harder route. And they also believe the killer was most likely someone from the area, as it's unlikely an outsider would have known how to find their way through all of that. The body was almost definitely dumped at night. The island and the area around it could be seen from the windows of several nearby houses, but none of the residents ever reported seeing anything suspicious during the day. Now, the victim was a white European male, estimated to be somewhere between 23 and 39 years old. He stood about 5 feet, 7 inches, or 5 feet 8 inches tall, and had a very slim build. The hair that was left on his body was straight, medium brown, or reddish brown in color, and no longer than 3 inches. Though he only had 18 teeth remaining, 10 of those had fillings. He also had a partial denture on the top. The dental work was described as extremely poor quality, but it had been done fairly recently, within 6 months before he died. His hands and feet were both described as small. His fingernails were short and well maintained, and he had a condition called torticollis, which would have made his head tilt noticeably to the right. Torticollis happens when the neck muscles become too weak to hold the head up straight. It can be a long-term problem, or just temporary, but there's no way to know how long he's been dealing with it. He also had a significant underbite, and investigators think his chin may have stuck out quite a bit because of this. When the body was found, he was naked except for a pair of nylon socks on his feet and a wedding band on his right ring finger. The socks were pinkish beige with a mustard-colored heel and toe. Police traced them back to a local stall at Burton Market. From the wear on them, it looked like they'd been used for about 2 to 3 months. There was also some chafing on the heel and toe areas, which suggested the man had been wearing shoes that didn't fit him properly. The wedding band was a size 0.5 women's 9-carat gold ring, and it was made by a company called Henry Schowell Limited, based in either Birmingham or West Bromwich, sometime between July 1967 and July 1968. The ring was part of a batch of 5,000 that were manufactured, but they weren't actually sold to retailers until 1969. But despite all the publicity about the case and pictures of his dental work being shared widely throughout England and Wales, no dentist has ever come forward to say they did the work. That's pretty unusual, and adds to the theory that he wasn't from the UK. Now, there was still enough flesh on the body for investigators to get partial fingerprints. They circulated these prints hoping for a match, but nothing came up. And also, no one in the system matched those prints. By October 1971, over 400 missing people worldwide had been ruled out as potential matches. When efforts to identify the decedent were utterly exhausted and he remained a mystery, authorities nicknamed him Fred the Head, owing to the fact that his head was found before the rest of the body. In 2006, Fred was given a new facial reconstruction by Professor Caroline Wilkinson at Liverpool John Moores University's Face Lab. Professor Wilkinson was the first person to notice the torticollis in Fred's remains, and she made sure to include that detail in her facial reconstruction, showing how his head would have tilted to the right. In June 2017, Fred's case was featured on Crime Watch Roadshow, a TV show that highlights unsolved cold cases in the UK. The hope is that someone watching might have information that could help solve these old crimes. Shortly after the episode aired, a family from Wales reached out to detectives. They were worried that Fred might be their relative, a 27-year-old man named John Henry Jones, who had disappeared from Trevor in Denbighshire back in November 1970. It seemed like a promising lead at first. The dental records looked remarkably similar to Fred's, but when they tested Fred's DNA against Jones's brother, it wasn't a match. It's been over 50 years since the person we only know as Fred died, and he's not the only one who remains nameless in this case. His killer is still unidentified too, and whoever did this has managed to avoid justice all these years. At this point, they may have already died and taken their secret to the grave with them. Still, police have said they believe this mystery can absolutely be solved. It just needs the right information from the right person.
Hey guys, I want to be transparent, and as you can see, I am the main host of this channel, not the narrator. And I also want to be clear that I use an AI tool to create these voices, but it doesn't mean that I don't put effort in this. I find the script, use different photos, videos, add sound effects. Now, I am also not a native English speaker, and even if I was, my voice is not good for storytelling, as you can see. And that's the main reason I use an AI voice. I have been creating videos for more than the last 2 years, and it has been a really good journey for me. But sadly, as of now, my channel is not running any ads. Now, you might say that that's what's happened when you post AI slop, right? Now, you are the main judge of this, but I will continue and try harder to make my videos better, as this channel means a lot to me, and thank you for being with me for this long.
There's a Harbor Freight store in your neighborhood where we sell hard-working tools that always...
I worked overnights at a local convenience store. Not ideal, but it paid my rent and let me keep up with community college classes during the day. Most nights were pretty much the same. Same few regulars, that buzzing soda fridge, old country songs on the radio, and a moth or two trying to crash the party through the glass. The store sat on the edge of town, next to a mostly empty strip mall. Half the businesses had for lease signs in their windows. So after dark, my little store was like an island under harsh fluorescent lights, surrounded by black parking lot. It was late March, still cold enough at night that I kept my hoodie on over my uniform. Around 11 p.m., things usually slowed down. The truckers had already passed through for coffee, and the college kids looking for snacks had gone back to their dorms. That's when the quiet settled in, the kind where every noise seems too loud, and you start noticing the flicker of the security light outside, or the way the clock ticks just a little uneven. That night was one of those shifts where time seemed to crawl. I'd wiped down the counter twice, restocked the gum rack, and was halfway through organizing the cigarette shelves when I noticed movement in the corner of my eye. Through the wide front windows, I saw him. He was standing under the tall light post at the far edge of the lot, right where the pavement met the darker stretch of the strip mall. He wasn't smoking or looking at his phone, just leaning against the pole, hands in his jacket pockets. At first, I figured he was waiting for someone. We got the occasional late-night rideshare drop-off or pickup, though not usually this far from the main road. I kept working, looking up now and then, but every time I looked, he was in the same spot, head angled just slightly toward the store. 15 minutes went by, then 30. He didn't move. I told myself it wasn't my problem. Maybe he was meeting a friend. Maybe his car had broken down. Still, I kept checking. Not obviously, just quick looks whenever I passed the register. Something about the way he stayed so still made me uneasy. Around 1 a.m., a couple came in for sodas. While they browsed, I peeked outside again. The man was still there. The couple left without looking his way, and I wondered if I was imagining the sense that his attention kept coming back to the store. By 2 a.m., he had shifted slightly, no longer leaning, now just standing, his posture straighter. I could see more of his face in the light, though from that distance, it was just pale and expressionless. The store was empty again. The parking lot silent except for the faint buzz from the lights. I debated calling the non-emergency police line, but what would I even say? There's a guy, standing. That wasn't a crime. Around 3 a.m., I noticed something new. He had moved closer. Not much, maybe 20 feet, but enough that I was sure of it. The weird thing was, I never saw him walk. One moment he was under the pole, the next he was between it and the dumpster enclosure. I told myself maybe I'd missed it while counting change or restocking. Still, my chest felt tight in a way I couldn't shake. A delivery truck pulled in around 3:15 to drop off bread. I signed the form and the driver wheeled in the racks. When I looked back outside, the man was leaning against the light post again, like nothing had changed. The truck left and the lot was empty, except for him. When 4 a.m. finally rolled around, I was relieved. I grabbed my bag from under the counter, locked the register, and went to the back to clock out. I told myself not to be ridiculous. I'd walk straight to my car, get in, and go home. But the moment I stepped outside, the air felt heavier, like everything had gone still. I looked toward the light post. He wasn't there. I looked around the lot, my heart starting to race, and then I saw him. He was leaning against my car, not looking at me, not doing anything. Just there, head slightly bowed, one hand resting flat on the hood. I froze for half a second before calling out, "Hey, can I help you?" I didn't mean to sound so harsh, but it just came out that way. He didn't answer, didn't even move. I took a step back toward the store door, hand finding the keys in my pocket. "You need to back away from my car." Slowly, too slowly, he straightened up and stepped away from the hood. But instead of walking off, he stopped a few feet away, looking past me toward the store windows. Something about that look made my skin crawl. I got my key in the door, stepped back inside, and locked it behind me. My hands were shaking now. I grabbed the phone, but before I could dial, I saw movement through the glass. He was walking away, not toward the street, but along the row of darkened storefronts.
For over a century, Bosch has engineered and tested wiper blades with advanced rubber formulations that deliver clarity, reliability, and long-lasting performance.
The shadows swallowed him within seconds. I waited inside for nearly half an hour before finally heading to my car. The hood was warm where his hand had been. I drove home without looking in the rearview mirror, and the next night I parked right under the front windows. I never saw him again. But every time I worked late after that, I checked that light post. And sometimes, even when it was empty, I could swear I felt someone watching from just beyond the edge of the lot. I've been working nights at this little 24-hour gas station on the edge of Missoula for a few years now. It's chill. And honestly, after driving trucks for over a decade, the quiet of a stationary job suited me. The station's just off a service road near the interstate. Enough traffic to keep the lights on, but most nights it's dead after midnight. Montana in October just feels extra still, like even the wind's being polite. The air gets crisp enough that you see your breath, but it's not full-on winter yet. On a clear night, you can hear the hum of the highway like a distant river, with a loud diesel engine breaking the monotony now and then. I actually liked it. Stocking shelves, sweeping the floors, and letting the clock crawl towards sunrise. It was one of those slow nights. Around 1 a.m., I was leaning on the counter, sipping lukewarm coffee, and absent-mindedly watching an old Western playing on the tiny TV by the register. Not a soul had come in for at least 45 minutes. Then the door opened. A guy stepped in, mid to late 40s maybe. Tall, but with this slouched posture like he was trying to make himself smaller. He wore a worn Carhartt jacket, jeans stiff with dirt, and a black baseball cap pulled low. I remember the way he looked around the store before walking up. His eyes didn't land on anything for long. "Hey," he said, voice low. You mind helping me pump some gas? Got a buddy's car out back. Hasn't been moved in a couple days." That alone was odd. People don't usually ask for help pumping gas, and we sure as hell don't go around back to do it for them. Company policy. I asked him why his friend didn't just pull up to the pumps. He said he can't really walk too well. Been having a hard time getting around. Car ran out of gas on him a couple nights ago. Now that raised another flag. I'd been out back earlier taking out trash, hadn't noticed any cars parked there. And when a car sits for a couple days, it's not something you miss. Still, I didn't want to outright say no, so I told him I'd take a quick look. We stepped outside. The night air had that quiet bite to it, and I noticed right away that the back of the lot was darker than usual. One of the floodlights had gone out. I followed him along the side of the building, the ground loud with every boot step. As soon as we rounded the corner, I saw it. A dusty silver sedan, parked near the edge of the lot where the gravel met the weeds. No plates. Windows slightly fogged from the inside. It looked like it hadn't been touched in days. And that's when I noticed the shape. In the back seat, under a thin blanket, was what looked like a person lying down, perfectly still. I slowed my pace. "That your friend?" The man looked at the car, but didn't answer directly. "Yeah, he's resting, not feeling too good." I don't know, the way he said resting gave me a weird feeling. I've seen plenty of people sleeping in their cars, truck stops are full of them, but this felt different. I took a step closer to the car. The blanket was pulled tight over the figure, almost like they'd been wrapped up. There was no movement, no sound of breathing, no shifting, just stillness. The guy's tone changed, quicker now. "So, you got one of those red gas cans? I can pay cash. Just need a gallon or two so we can get out of here." I told him we didn't have cans. He pressed a little, said he'd leave his ID, even his jacket. I could feel him watching me while I looked at the car. Then, from the other side of the lot, I heard something. Not from the car, off in the distance. A faint rustle in the weeds, followed by what sounded like a short cough or groan. The man's head turned sharply toward the sound, then back to me. His voice dropped even lower. "Don't worry about that. Just the wind." It wasn't the wind. I was starting to piece things together in my head. No plates. Car abandoned for days. Someone lying in the back, unmoving. A man showing up in the middle of the night asking me to help pump gas for it. I told him I needed to go back inside and check with my manager about policy. His face tensed up, just for a second, before he nodded. Walking back to the front, I kept my pace even, trying not to make it obvious that I wanted to put some distance between us. Once inside, I locked the door behind me and grabbed the phone. I called the non-emergency police line, told them exactly what I'd seen. A suspicious man, an abandoned car with no plates, a possible person in the back seat not moving. They said they'd send a unit to check it out. While I was on the phone, the man walked past the windows toward the front of the store. He tried the door, found it locked, stood there for a moment, staring in. Then he walked away toward the side of the building. For the next few minutes, I couldn't see him. I kept my eyes on the security monitors. The camera angle for the back lot is terrible, mostly shadows, but I caught glimpses of movement near the car. About 10 minutes later, 2 patrol cars pulled in. Lights off. The officer spoke to me first, then headed around back. I watched from inside as their flashlights swept over the gravel and onto the car. One of them opened the rear door. The blanket slid off. From where I stood, I couldn't see much detail, but I could tell right away the person inside wasn't sleeping. The officer's body language told the rest. He turned, said something into his radio, and the whole scene changed. Another cruiser showed up, then an ambulance. They kept me inside while they worked. Eventually, one of the officers came in to get my statement. He didn't give me much, just said the person in the car was in very bad shape and had been there for a while. As for the man who'd come into the store, they didn't find him. I finished my shift that night, But the building's noises were seriously messing with me. I kept replaying his face in my head. How calm he'd been at first, then how quickly he changed when I started asking questions. For weeks afterward, I found myself looking toward the back lot every time I stepped outside. The car was gone by the next afternoon, but in my mind, it's still there, parked in the shadows with that motionless shape in the back. And somewhere out there, the man who wanted me to help pump gas for it is still walking around. I work nights at a small gas station wedged between a highway on-ramp and an empty strip mall that never managed to fill 2 years in a row. Nights at the station were usually my kind of quiet. I'm not a morning person, and I hate heavy crowds, so the graveyard shift is kind of my comfort zone. The pay wasn't great, but I got to listen to music, sip coffee, and watch some random drunk stumble in looking for chips or cigarettes. That night in June started like any other. Humid, but with a breeze that kept the air from feeling too hot. I'd had a steady trickle of customers until about 1:30, mostly people heading home from bars. By the time it was pushing 2:45, the lot was empty and the road out front was dead quiet. Closing time for me wasn't really closing, since the pumps stayed locked and card only until morning. My main job after that was counting the register, locking the inside doors, and making sure everything was clean. Part of that routine was checking the bathrooms in the back before I clocked out. We only had one restroom, single stall, unisex, tucked in the far corner of the store past the stock room. It was nothing special. Linoleum floors that were always slightly discolored no matter how much you scrubbed, a single flickering fluorescent light overhead, and a fan in the ceiling that hummed just loud enough to be annoying. I grabbed the bathroom key from the hook by the register and headed back. My plan was to do a quick check, spray some cleaner, and get out. When I got to the door, I noticed it wasn't locked. That wasn't unusual. Sometimes customers forgot to latch it. But what stuck out was that the light inside was off. Normally, if someone forgot to lock it, they still left the light on. I pushed the door open a few inches, expecting an empty room. Instead, I saw the faint outline of a person standing in the far corner facing the wall. It took me a second to process what I was looking at. No movement, no sound. Just a figure about average height, arms at their sides. My first thought was that maybe it was a drunk who had wandered in and passed out standing up, if that was even possible. "Hey," I said, trying not to be so loud. "We're closed. You okay?" No answer. I reached for the light switch just inside the door, but before I could flip it, a voice, low, barely above a whisper, said, "Don't." I froze with my hand on the wall. It wasn't the kind of "don't" you say when you're joking or embarrassed. It was flat, serious. Something in my brain started telling me this wasn't just some drunk. "Look, man," I said, stepping back a little. "You can't be in here. We're closing up." Nothing. Turned around, didn't shift their weight, didn't make any noise at all. The longer the silence dragged on, the more I noticed little details. The way they were standing, too rigid, like they were bracing against something. How their head was tilted slightly downward, not in a sleepy way, but like they were staring at something on the wall in front of them. I backed up into the stockroom, pulled the door halfway closed, and took out my phone. We didn't have security in the building, just me. So calling the cops felt like the only logical move. I explained the situation to dispatch. Guy in the bathroom, not responding, acting strange. They told me an officer would be there in a few minutes. While I waited, I stayed in the stock room, keeping the bathroom door in my line of sight. I didn't hear any footsteps, no toilet flush, no sink running. Just that constant low hum from the ceiling fan. About 2 minutes later, the bathroom door creaked open. The guy stepped out slowly, still facing away from me, and walked down the hallway toward the front of the store. I caught a quick look at him, under the dim light from the stock room. A hoodie pulled up over his head, dark jeans, and work boots. His walk had this weird calm to it, like he knew no one would dare step in his way. I stayed put, letting him walk right past the register without a word. He didn't look at me, didn't look around, just kept going until he pushed the front door open and slipped outside into the dark. The weirdest part? I hadn't heard the front door open when I came back to check the bathroom earlier. He must have been in there the whole time. By the time the cops showed up, maybe 3 minutes later, the guy was long gone. I gave the officer a description, but I couldn't give much. Hoodie, jeans, boots. No clear view of his face. The officer checked the bathroom and didn't find anything unusual. No graffiti, no sign of drugs, no smell of alcohol. Nothing. When I asked him if I should be worried, he just shrugged and said, "Could have been someone looking for a place to crash for a bit. Still, keep the door locked from now on." I did exactly that after that night. But the thing that stuck with me wasn't him being in there. It's what I noticed the next morning when the day shift came in. I'd gone in to grab something from the back, and on the bathroom wall, right where the guy had been facing, there were fresh scratches in the paint. Not random marks, straight vertical lines, about a dozen of them, all the same length, like someone had dragged their fingernails or a tool down the wall over and over. The guy never came back. And I still don't know why he told me not to turn on the light. I've always been a night owl, but nothing could have prepared me for the kind of nights you get working alone at a rural gas station. I'm 24, living in Bakersfield, California, and I picked up this job for the extra cash while figuring out my next move. The pay wasn't great, but the hours fit, and most nights were boring enough to feel almost safe. This place sits off a quiet stretch of highway, the kind where cars come in waves. 20 minutes of nothing, then 3 vehicles at once. We've got 2 pumps, a tiny store, and one of those buzzing neon open signs that looks older than me. Inside there's a counter, some shelves of snacks, and a soda fridge, humming so loud it almost drowns out the silence. Most nights are uneventful. The occasional trucker grabs coffee or a couple of locals come in for beer. But one Thursday night in June, I had an encounter I can't stop thinking about. It was close to midnight when I saw her, walking up from the dark shoulder of the highway. At first, I thought maybe she'd broken down. She was mid-30s, maybe early 40s, wearing jeans and a faded hoodie. The hood was up, casting a shadow over her face, but I could still see her eyes glinting in the fluorescent light when she stepped inside. "Hey," she said softly, "would you mind if I just waited in here for a little while?" Her voice was calm, but had this undercurrent of something uneasy. My first instinct was to say yes. After all, it's not like I get much company. But the request felt strange. People usually come in to buy something, then hang around if they need to. They don't start off with, "Let me wait inside." Is everything okay?" I asked. She hesitated, then said, "Yeah, just safer in here, I think." Safer. That word stuck with me. I told her we weren't really supposed to let people hang out unless they were customers, but she could grab something to drink and stay as long as she wanted. She nodded slowly, walked over to the cooler, and took out a bottle of water. I rang it up, and she paid in cash. The whole time, she kept looking toward the big glass windows at the front. Not in a casual way. More like she was checking if something was still out there. When I asked if she had a car nearby, she shook her head. "Been walking a while." That was all she offered. After that, she sat at the small counter we keep for coffee and just stayed quiet. Every now and then, I'd hear her whisper something, but I could never quite make it out. I wanted to ask more, but something about her posture, tense, almost coiled, told me not to push. About 20 minutes later, a dark sedan slowed down as it passed the station. Not unusual for cars to roll by slow at night, but this one didn't keep going. It pulled into the lot and idled under the far streetlight. I could see the driver's silhouette, but the windows were tinted too dark to make out details. The woman's head snapped toward the window, and I swear her whole body stiffened. "That's him," she whispered. I froze. "Who?" She didn't answer. She just grabbed her bottle of water and moved farther back into the store, away from the glass. The sedan didn't move for a solid minute. Then, without ever pulling up to the pumps or the store, it rolled out of the lot and disappeared back down the highway. When I turned to ask her what that was about, she was already on her feet. "Thank you for letting me stay," she said quickly, then walked out the door before I could stop her. I stepped outside, watching her head in the opposite direction of the car. She didn't look back. After a few seconds, she was swallowed by the darkness beyond the streetlights. The rest of the night felt off. Every set of headlights that appeared in the distance made my stomach knot. I kept expecting that sedan to come back, but it never did. At least not while I was there. The next night, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Who was him? Why wouldn't she stay until morning? I even checked the local news for anything about a missing woman, but nothing came up. 2 nights later, she came back. Same hoodie, same slow walk up from the highway. But this time, she looked even more on edge. "Please," she said as soon as she stepped in, "can I just be here for a bit?" I didn't hesitate this time. I told her she could stay as long as she needed. We barely talked for the first half hour. She sat in the same spot by the coffee counter, hands wrapped tight around a cup she hadn't even sipped from. Then she broke the silence. "He followed me here last time." My skin prickled. "The guy in the sedan?" She nodded, eyes locked on the front window. "He's been following me for weeks. Not every night. Just enough to remind me." I wanted to ask why she didn't go to the police, but she answered before I could. "Already tried. They can't do anything until he actually does something. And by then," she trailed off. Around 1:30 a.m., a pair of headlights appeared in the distance. She tensed immediately. As the car drew closer, I recognized it. The same dark sedan. It pulled into the lot again, idling in the exact same spot as before. This time, I could feel my own pulse in my ears. I reached under the counter for the bat we keep back there, just in case. The driver door opened. A man stepped out, tall, wearing a baseball cap low over his face. He didn't head for the pumps. He didn't head for the store. He just stood there, staring through the glass at us. "Call the cops," she whispered. I grabbed the phone, dialing 911 while keeping my eyes on him. The moment I started speaking to the dispatcher, he turned, got back in the car, and drove off without a word. The police showed up 15 minutes later. By then, he was long gone. They took our statements, but admitted there wasn't much they could do. Without a license plate or evidence of a direct threat, it was just suspicious behavior. She left with the officers that night, but I could tell she didn't feel any safer. That was the last time I saw her in person. A week later, I found something taped to the glass door when I came in for my shift. It was a note written in hurried, uneven handwriting. "Thank you for not turning me away. He knows where I sleep now." No name. No return address. I stood there for a long time, staring at those words. The note felt heavier than paper should. For the next month, I kept getting the creeps whenever someone drove by the station too slow. Sometimes I'd catch my own reflection in the glass and expect to see someone else standing behind me. I still work there, but my routine has changed. I keep the doors locked after midnight, even though technically I'm not supposed to. And when I see headlights pause too long in the lot, I keep one hand near the phone. Because here's the thing. She walked into my life twice, and both times, she left the same way she came, into the dark. And whoever he was, I've got a bad feeling she's still looking over her shoulder. Tuesday nights were my favorite because they had a rhythm I could trust. By 11, the regulars were gone. Mr. Perez with his menthols, the nurse with her grape drink, the guy who always wanted to talk football. After that, it was just me, a faint playlist overhead, and the cooler's white noise behind me. My blue Corolla was parked under the brightest light, visible from the counter. That light threw clean, predictable shadows across the concrete. It was chilly for Tampa. I had my hoodie on under my uniform and had already locked the door and hung the bathroom key on its rotor hook. Everything was quiet. Then it got too quiet. The fridge cycled off. The hallway fan spun down. Then all of a sudden, the quiet felt tense. I looked up. Outside, leaning on my Corolla's hood, was a man. No phone, no cigarette, just leaning. Head turned just enough to make it seem like he was watching for something, or someone. I checked the side angle camera. He wasn't looking at me. He was watching the street. Mid-30s, clean hat, gray zip-up, dusty jeans. His shoes looked newer than the rest of him. He stood like the car belonged to him. People don't lean on strangers' cars. I kept my keys in my hoodie pocket, fingers curling around them. The pumps were empty. The street was dead. The tire shop was closed. I thought about calling my manager, but he'd say to call non-emergency. And they'd probably say, he's just standing there. So I decided to handle it. I buzzed myself out. "Hey," I said flatly, "that's my car." He turned, smiled like I'd said something funny. "Your mom sent me." I laughed once. No, she didn't. "She called me, said you get off at midnight." I nodded toward the store. "She lives 3 states away. She's definitely asleep. She's worried about you walking alone, said you park under the big light." That was easy to guess. He didn't raise his voice, but the way he said it hit me hard, like it was proof. He acted like he was just adjusting his stance, casually blocking the driver's door. "What's her name?" I asked. He waved vaguely. "She knows your manager, said you'd be nervous." "I'm not," I lied, scanning my surroundings. "What's her name?" He didn't answer. Just looked toward the counter like hoping a manager wouldn't appear. "I've got places to be," he said, still smiling. "I'm not going to wait all night." "Then go," I replied. "You're on my car." He pushed off like I'd failed some test. Took a few steps toward me. Slow, just closing distance. I stepped back into the doorframe, held it with my foot. "Call your mom," he said, lifting his phone. The screen showed Mom. But anyone can name a contact that. He didn't call. Just waited for me to believe it. I stepped back in and locked the deadbolt. That sound, the bolt sliding home, felt powerful. He paused at the window, then slowly walked toward the passenger side. I hit the key fob and the locks clicked. He watched the blink of my hazard lights. I think he wanted me to see him watching. I picked up the phone, called non-emergency. There's a man leaning on my car claiming my mom sent him. He's blocking my driver's side door. Is he trying to enter the store? No, he's trying to make me come out. "We have a unit nearby," she said. "Stay inside." A sedan rolled up to pump 3. A girl about my age. She saw me, saw him. I gave her a small wave. "Please wait." She stayed in her car, watching, a witness. He pretended not to notice, walked around my car, peered into the windows, tapped the glass, then looked at me and mouthed something. Might have been, "You ready?" Doesn't matter. I read it that way. I texted my manager, "Man at my car claiming my mom sent him. I called the cops." He replied, "Good." The guy drifted to the front of my car again, placing his hip right where I'd have to squeeze through if I tried to bolt for the passenger side. He'd mapped it out. The girl at pump 3 cracked her window. "You good?" "Police are coming," I said, gesturing. She nodded. Her car stayed on, headlights aimed right at my bumper. He didn't like her watching. He moved, slowly, until his body blocked her line of sight to my door, then rested his hand on the roof like it belonged there. "Seriously," he said, "your mom asked me to get you. Don't make this weird." "What's her name?" I asked again. Nothing. He looked at the store sign like it might help. His other hand slid into his pocket. A rideshare SUV passed, slowed, then drove on. He watched it. I didn't move. Then the store phone rang. I answered, still watching him. "Station." A quiet voice. "You ready?" Then a click. "Caller ID. Blocked." I set the phone down. I didn't know if he called or someone else did. Either way, it matched. Too perfectly. A patrol car pulled into the lot, lights off. The officer stepped out. I recognized him. He buys coffee here. He didn't shout, just walked toward us like he was browsing snacks. The man lifted his hands slightly. Chill, friendly. The officer said something. The man gestured at my car, talking with his hands. The officer didn't look where he pointed, just watched his hands and then looked at me. I gave a single nod. They spoke quietly. I saw words like ride, mom, misunderstanding. The officer stayed firm. Trespass, her vehicle, leave. He laughed, shrugged, like he was being reasonable. Another cruiser pulled in. The first officer came to the door. I let him in. "You okay?" "Yes." I gave the short version. He nodded. "We'll issue a trespass. If he returns, call us." Outside, the second cop got the guy's name. He gave some story. They walked him to the edge of the lot. He didn't look back. The girl from pump 3 came in to pay. Her cash was balled in a fist. "You want me to hang out until you're in your car?" she asked. "Yes," I said. 2 minutes. We wrapped up. I locked the office. She stood watch. The cop walked me out and waited as I unlocked. I sat in the driver's seat with the fan blasting, just breathing. Then I drove home. Took a different route. Brighter streets, porches with lights, places that were yelling might get you help. When I got in, I texted my mom. We needed a code word. Something dumb, something only we'd know. And if anyone ever said they were with her, they'd have to say that word. And if they didn't, I'd never open the door. If you also thought the creepiest part wasn't the figure outside, but realizing you'd already walked past them earlier, smash that like button, subscribe so